All these years I believed that my family was my life. My husband, Dave, and I had been together for almost 25 years. Everything was stable, even a little boring. I thought it would always be like that. But life has its own plans for us, and what happened turned my idea of love and family upside down. Dave has always come first for me. I couldn't even imagine how you could not trust the person you've lived with for most of your life. We had everything: a house, a car, children. Everything was going well. But I didn't notice how it all started to fall apart. He started to move away. At first I thought it was just a period, that he was tired of work, of the routine. But it was more than that. When I found out that he was seeing someone else, it was a bolt from the blue for me. I can't put into words what I felt at that moment. First, I felt as if someone had punched me in the stomach, when then came the horror. And only after that, when all the emotions seemed to have subsided, came disappointment. Disappointment in myself, in him, in everything I thought was right. He came home late at night, and I was waiting for him because we had to talk, but he didn't try to hide his guilt. "You know it happened," he said, looking me straight in the eye. I couldn't believe it. It couldn't be true. I thought we were together for life. But he decided otherwise. Betrayal is not just a word. It is a state when you feel like you don't know who you are anymore. I couldn't understand what I had done wrong. I was a good wife. I always supported him, took care of the family. Why did he go to another woman? It was the woman he met at work, young, bright, energetic. It would seem that they were so different. But he chose her. I remember the moment he told me that. I was in tremendous pain. I literally could not breathe. At that moment, my whole dawn picture of an ideal family life just crumbled. He didn't even try to apologize or explain why it happened. He just said he wanted to be with her. And that was it. And after he left, I was left alone with our children. They were shocked, but they could not yet fully understand what had happened. How to explain to them that their father had left for another woman. And how to tell them there was no room for happiness in my heart anymore, only emptiness and pain. The first few days after he left were the hardest, and my entire reality turned out to be built on illusions, and I didn't even know how to rebuild my life. How do you move on when your soul is literally torn apart? How do you survive this emptiness when there is no one around to support you? And at night, I couldn't sleep because my thought not let me rest. I thought about what I had done wrong. I had everything: a loving husband, children, a home. But something was missing, and I couldn't understand what it was all over so quickly. All my years with him seemed to be in vain. How could I notice his alienation? How could I not realize that he had left me long ago? Loneliness became my biggest enemy. I could no longer communicate with my friends as I used to. I couldn't tell them what had happened. They would not understand. Why? Because everyone saw us as a perfect couple. Now, I was just a woman who had lost everything. My days began to drag on like heavy stones pressing down on my chest. I tried to force myself to move forward, but inside I was broken. Over time, the pain began to subside, but there was a void that no one could fill. I began to realize that now I had to solve all my problems on my own. I had to pull myself together, if not for myself, then at least for my children. But from time to time I still remembered him. Maybe it was not so much pain as disappointment. Maybe it was all the result of his choices, but I remained in the shadow of his mistakes. I still couldn't bring myself to curse him, even though I was deeply wounded. He was gone, and now I had to build my life without him. But with each new day I began to feel that all was not lost. I learned to live in a new way, to find joy in the little things. I may not have experienced full happiness yet, but I began to believe that there was still a chance. But it was just an illusion. My path to recovery was just beginning. Feelings of disappointment and pain completely overwhelmed me. But I understood one thing: I was no longer the woman he had left 10 years ago. I could be strong again, and even if he came back, I would be different. I realized that my life depended only on me, and I was ready for any twists and turns that lay ahead. There was only one question left: should I let him come back into my life or not? And what would happen next? Oh no, that moment hasn't come yet. Every day after Dave left was like a new challenge. In the beginning, all I felt was emptiness. My life suddenly became completely different, and I couldn't find anything in it that was familiar or cozy. It seems that we all live in our own little world and don't notice how it changes until it's too late. At first, I tried to hold on, to act as if nothing had happened. I continued to go to work, cook for my children, keep the house in order, but every day was like a battle. If only I could turn back the clock and do everything differently. But life doesn't offer such opportunities, and I knew I had to accept my new reality. Loneliness became my constant companion. In the evenings, when the children went to bed, I was alone, and silence filled the whole house. I even knew it was scary at first. I even tried to fill this space with work, walks, books, but none of these ways gave me the comfort I used to get from Dave's presence. I could still hear his voice in my thoughts, and that was the most painful thing. But over time, I began to realize that I didn't have to find a way to forget about his absence. I had to find myself. All this time I was Dave's woman. My thoughts, my energy, my life revolved around him. Now that he was gone, I had to start living for myself. A few months after he left, I began to ask myself, what do I want out of life? I didn't have an answer right away, but I felt that something had to change. I started meeting my friends more, taking art classes, learning new skills. Unexpectedly for me, I discovered that all this brought me real joy. My life began to take on new colors. I was no longer so afraid to be alone with myself. One day, on my way home from work, I met Will, a man who worked next to me. He was older than me, but he had some interesting energy. He wasn't a typical, quiet man. He had his own view on life and wasn't afraid to express it. At first, we just met. Then we started spending time together. Will was one of those people who made me feel that I was living again, that I was worthy of attention. It was different. Not like with Dave. I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't looking to start something serious again, but I felt that he could give me support, understanding, and a little peace. And we became good friends, and it was he who helped me realize that even after a painful loss, you can find new opportunities for yourself. One of the most important moments of this period is that I started to learn how to take care of myself. If before all my energy was spent on my family, on Dave, on the children, now I focused on being happy on my own. I spent more time outdoors, went for walks, traveled, and, most importantly, started to love my life again. These moments of loneliness became important because I learned to listen to myself, to accept myself as I am. They allowed me to look at my situation from a different perspective. But most importantly, I realized that my happiness does not depend on whether I have a man in my life. It depends on me, and I had to realize this through pain and loneliness, but now I knew that I could find joy in every day, even if I was alone. But despite all the changes, I could not completely let go of the past. During the day, I was busy with new things, but at night I couldn't help but think about Dave. His absence was constantly on my mind. Why did he leave? Did we have opportunities for things to change? Or was it just a mistake on his part? I was looking for answers, but I realized that there would be none. The past had left its marks, and I could no longer ignore it. My whole new identity was built on this loss, on pain. It seems that I will never be able to completely get rid of what happened. And although I tried to move on with my life, the question of why he left remained unanswered. Maybe he didn't even know the answer himself. After a day by day, I became stronger and more independent. I felt that I was starting to really live my life, not someone else's. Although my heart was still hurting, I no longer let it define me. My life was my choice. And even if the past stayed with me, I would move forward. I was ready for what lay ahead. After all, every new day is a new chance. The beginning of my new life was far from ideal. I tried to cope with everything, to restore my balance after everything that had happened. But one event changed everything. When I found out that Dave had left for a young woman, I felt like the ground was slipping away from under my feet. At first, I couldn't even believe it was true. My heart was so hurt that I couldn't understand how it could happen. So I thought that our relationship was something unbreakable, that we would go through all the difficulties together. And now, instead of support, I received betrayal. The feeling of betrayal was unbearable. It's not that I considered myself the best woman in the world, but I was faithful. I gave him my heart, my soul, my years. And then he found someone younger, Predator, who seemed to be a perfect match for him. Was it true love? Or was it just an impulse that would quickly fade away? I couldn't understand it, but at that moment I was not interested in anything but how he could do this to me. And so I stood in front of the mirror, studying my reflection. My skin was no longer so elastic, and the first wrinkles appeared in front of my eyes. I tried to convince myself that these were just natural changes that happened to everyone. But I was tormented by one question: why did he choose her over me? Why wasn't I the one he wanted to spend the rest of his days with? And then I saw her. A young girl with a carefree look and that magical confidence that youth gives you. She was a few years younger than me, but her eyes shone with something I no longer had: innocence, purity, energy. She was allowed to do anything, and she knew it. But these thoughts were just my assumptions, because I didn't know why she was the object of his desire. Then I didn't know anything about their relationship, about what happened between them, but there was a suspicion in my heart that this situation was much worse than I could have imagined. Did he love her? Or was it just a way to forget about me? I started comparing myself to the young women I saw around me. Not only physically, but emotionally as well. I thought I had lost my attractiveness, that I had become old and useless. My mind was filled with doubts. Could I change anything in my life to get him back? Or was everything I had already lost? But with each new day, with each new reflection, I realized that the worst thing I could do was to live in comparison. I started working on myself again. And although I had a feeling of defeat, of betrayal, I decided that I would not let it define me. You can't live in the past. So I decided to act. Instead of focusing on his choice, I started focusing on myself. I signed up for courses, started spending more time with myself, my hobbies, and looking for new career opportunities. I couldn't turn back the clock and make Dave stay, but I could change my future. Over time, I came to understand. Maybe there really was a part of his inner world that wanted something new. Maybe he wanted to feel young again. Maybe it was not only my betrayal, but also his search, his dissatisfaction with something in his life. I don't know, and maybe I will never know. But I knew one thing: my life should not revolve around his choices. I kept looking for a way to recover, and it was hard. The pain of his leaving was not going away. I could still feel that pain binding me, that it did not give me peace, as if I remained locked in a cage with its cold metal bars. If only I could turn back the clock, I would tell him everything on my mind. But now I knew I had to move forward, and I started to do so. Suddenly I realized that all I could do was learn to love myself again. And even though I was left with an emptiness in my heart, I knew that time and self-care would help me fill in those gaps. New perspectives began to appear in my life. I didn't expect to feel happiness again, but it came back, although not in the way I had imagined. And although the betrayal left a bitter taste in my heart, I was no longer afraid to open new horizons. I was ready to live my life, not the life that others had imposed on me. It was the first step to freeing myself from the memories of Dave, from comparisons and pain. It was the beginning of my new life, where I was at the center of my world, and only I decided what would happen next. A few months passed after Dave left me. At first it was hard to accept that I was no longer a part of his life. Everything was so unfair, so confusing. But gradually, I began to realize that losing this man didn't mean the end for me. It was just the beginning. A beginning that, although painful, opened the door to new opportunities. I no longer felt the constant pain that arose every time I thought about him. At first, this pain was so acute that I couldn't think about anything else. But time, strangely enough, healed my wounds. I began to return to myself, to what I hadn't noticed in everyday life. I used to do everything for him, his interests, his needs, his problems were my problems. But now I saw that life is not about giving everything to another person without getting anything in return. Somehow, after a few months of staying in my detached reality, I felt that something had changed. I was free. Free from him, from his influence, from the constant questions I asked myself. Why? And what's wrong with me? At that moment I realized that the biggest loss was not the relationship, but the loss of myself in it. Now I began to feel free, as if I had slipped out of something that was too burdensome for me. I could go anywhere, do what I wanted, decide for myself, without restrictions and constant thoughts about whether I was doing the right thing for him. It was an invaluable freedom. Too, it was like a breath of fresh air after a long time spent in the fog. And although I still haven't forgotten about him, I no longer let my feelings control me. It's funny, but I started to feel even better about myself than before I met Dave. Only now did I realize how much I was missing out on when I sacrificed myself in the name of a relationship. I decided to return to my old hobbies, which I had long ago abandoned. I started writing, drawing, and even signed up for a yoga course. I was fascinated by the idea of self-expression, and it became something very important to me. And maybe I wasn't ready for a new relationship yet, but I began to realize that life goes on. And I have a right to it. One day, while walking in the park, I met Paul. He was of a similar age to me, looking like a calm, intelligent man who had his own beliefs and stories. We started talking, and we developed a strange but interesting chemistry. And Paul was surprisingly open and confident, not trying to manipulate or create false ideals. I felt that he was far from the world I had left behind with Dave. He was different, with different priorities, a different understanding of what it means to be with another person. Paul was not a pressure or reminder of what I had been through. He didn't want anything from me, and that was important. We just walked together, talked, and sometimes joked. All these moments made me feel that there is life after pain. Suddenly, my thoughts turned to Dave again. Why did he leave me? Why couldn't he and I keep what we had? And how did we become such strangers? This question tormented me, but I had no answer. Maybe it was better that he left. Maybe I was just a stop in his life, not the final destination. These were important questions that I could ask myself, but I was no longer waiting for answers. I realized that my life should not depend on why things happened the way they did. I lived in the here and now, and that was what mattered. I was ready to move on. The moment I met Paul, I realized one simple thing: sometimes to build a new life, you just have to let go of the past. Sometimes, to find your happiness, you have to get rid of old fears and bad habits. I became a different woman, not the one who is just waiting for someone who betrayed her to come back, but the one who is ready to act and change her life for the better. Even though I wasn't ready for big changes yet, I realized that I was alive, and I had the right to new happiness and new opportunities. Now I was not afraid to look into the future. It was mine, and I was entitled to it. And although the past was still a part of me, I began to realize that the future didn't have to be a repetition of what had happened. I could choose how I would live my life. And this new path, with all its opportunities and challenges, was open to me. I was ready to take the next step. 10 years later, it was a whole life cycle, full of changes, new beginnings and achievements that I made after he left me. Dave had long since become a part of my past. Even the memories of him were empty and emotionless. I managed to change my life, create new connections, find a new purpose, and rediscover myself. And then, out of the blue, he came back. Again. I was sitting on the balcony of my small apartment, enjoying the silence when I saw him. He was standing there on the sidewalk with a look I remembered, just like 10 years ago. Only now he was gaunt, tired, and not so young anymore. It was him, but at the same time he was a different man who had come a long way, just like me. And this made me feel the first moments of deep surprise. I couldn't believe my eyes. Dave. He was standing in front of my door, as if nothing had happened, as if we hadn't been separated, as if everything had remained the same. My mind raced with thoughts. What does he want? Why did he come back? I felt fear, anger, and at the same time a certain curiosity. Over the past 10 years I had become a different person, and it seemed that this moment would have no significance for my current life. But something deep inside me told me that this meeting would change everything. Dave was not the same as I remembered. He came in, slightly hunched over, with a face that spoke of many years of experience. These eyes that had once fascinated me now looked confused, sad. He stood there silently, not gauging my reaction, just waiting. I didn't know what to say. Silence hung between us like a heavy shadow. All I could do was just stand there, look at him, and watch as time brought us back to the place I had been trying so hard to escape. But I knew I couldn't let it go unanswered. I couldn't just close the door and leave, and I had to give him a chance to explain why he came back. So I took the first step. I opened the door, looked at him, and asked him quietly, "You came back after all these years. Why?" He shrugged his shoulders and looked at the ground. It was not how I had imagined. I expected him to make excuses, to say goodbye, to repent, but no. Instead, he silently came closer, as if he couldn't find the words to explain. And I realized, he didn't know what to say. His loneliness, his determination, his attempts to return it all looked like a big mistake, like an attempt to fill the void. During these 10 years, my life changed. I became a different woman, strong, independent, confident. I no longer needed apologies or explanations. I had survived the fact that he had left me. Now it was my time. The other time when I could choose what to do, who to be, and what my future would be. And here he was, standing in front of me. I could have taken offense, told him how hard it was to live without him, how much I suffered, but I didn't want to. I was no longer the woman who hung out in the past. I was stubborn and ready for change. And now, after everything I had been through, I couldn't let him affect my life again. Instead of attacking him with complaints, I asked him calmly, "Why did you come back? What do you want from me after all these years?" His answer was unexpected. He did not make excuses, did not try to win my heart again. He simply said, "I don't know. But I regret leaving you then, and I want to at least try to fix my mistakes." I felt as if I had stepped out of the shadow he had left behind. There was no room in my heart for forgiveness, and I realized that I was capable of more than what he had ever given me. My path was different, and I no longer needed him to be happy. We stood there looking at each other, and I felt the distance between us grow even greater. It wasn't a matter of betrayal or loss. It was a matter of finally finding myself and no longer being ready to give myself to another person who couldn't appreciate it. Dave stood quietly, as if waiting for me to say the next thing. I looked at him, remembered everything we had, and realized that it was already in the past. I was no longer his woman, and he was no longer my man. I took a step back, took a deep breath, and said, "Go. You missed your chance." And with that, I closed the door, leaving behind not only him, but everything we could have had. The day Dave reappeared in my life was a turning point. I thought I had left everything behind: the pain, the disappointment, the resentment. But his return to my door opened a new door to questions I wasn't ready to answer. Is it worth forgiving him? Is it possible to get back what was lost? And does it make sense to forgive when life has moved on? It was a new battle in my heart, and I didn't know how to win it. What happened to us could not be reduced to a simple, "He left." It was much more than that. I felt my soul tearing up from the betrayal, from the fact that we were together, and then he just left me without warning, as if we had never been. I tried to imagine what could have been if he had stayed. But time and new circumstances made me realize that nothing would have changed. We lived different lives, and even if he had come back, it would not have been the same. But even with all these thoughts, I still felt a little shiver when I thought of him. Maybe it was just nostalgia for the past, but I felt my heart flutter when we bumped into each other again. And it was even harder than I could have imagined. What do you do when the person who betrayed you asks for forgiveness? Is it possible to restore what has been destroyed? My soul was torn between the desire for forgiveness and the fear that I would give him a part of myself again. I couldn't say yes right away. I couldn't just forget how he disappeared. And at the same time, it was hard for me to see him like that, broken and unhappy. Did he really want to come back to me, or was he just looking for a way to close the gaps in his life? We sat on the couch in my room. All these years I was used to being alone, to not needing anyone to be happy. I was used to making my own decisions and not depending on men. And here I was again with someone who had once betrayed my trust. My thoughts kept asking questions. How can I forgive him? Can I do it? Dave sat across from me, looking me in the eye. He didn't say much, only occasionally dropping words in silence, trying to explain his behavior. His voice sounded quiet, confused. I could feel that he was really sorry for what had happened, but was it enough for me to forgive him? I was filled with a sense of uncertainty. I realized that this was an important moment for him. He was looking for some kind of redemption, looking for my forgiveness. But what happened next? Would his forgiveness change our reality? Would it help to remove everything that happened between us? And would I be ready to let him back into my life? We sat on the couch and I thought about it. I was no longer that young girl who blindly gave in to her feelings. I was a woman who had gone through pain and betrayal, who had learned to live independently. My stubbornness and independence became my strength. Then I realized that forgiveness could not be just an act of mercy, but rather an internal decision. I had to determine for myself whether my soul wanted to return to that past, or whether it was better to leave it behind. And I looked at Dave again. His eyes were full of remorse, but something inside me asked, is this enough to make it all come back? Is it possible to forgive a person for what they have done? Or is the choice to move forward without looking back? My hand reached for the cup of tea. I slowly raised it to my lips and allowed myself a few seconds to think it over. And then I realizing I had to answer my question. I could forgive him, but that didn't mean I had to get back together with him. Perhaps forgiveness is not about returning to an old relationship, but about moving on. Maybe it's just a way of freeing myself from the hurt without letting it control my life. I looked at Dave and said, I don't blame you, Dave. But this is the past. I can't go back, and I can't forget what happened. I forgive you, but for me it doesn't mean going back to the way things were. I can't let you back into my life. Dave nodded silently. His eyes were full of sadness, but he didn't object. I could see how hard this was for him, but it was my decision. My forgiveness meant more than just words. It was a step towards letting go of the past and moving on. And I took another deep breath, and he realized that we were both moving in different directions. I sat on an old wooden chair, looking out the window. It was getting dark outside, and the evening sky was turning red as if someone had spilled blood on a canvas. My mind, however, was far from this beauty. It was filled with thoughts of how to get out of this situation. All these years I had been carefully hiding my feelings, building walls around me. But now, when he came back into my life, these walls began to crack. The way other people looked at me added to the confusion. Of course, they didn't know the whole truth, but they had already formed their own opinions. And this opinion was the same: I should take him back. What scared me the most was the way society treated my choice. All these conversations, looks, unspoken comments around me. My Greta couldn't understand why I was even letting Dave come back into my life. She thought I should push him away forever because he had made me an object of betrayal. Why would you do that? She kept asking. But I saw in her eyes not only concern, but also something more, condemnation. She thought that I was weak, that I was not capable of being a real woman who did not need to return to old relationships. There were other people who didn't like my weakness either. He dumped you. He cheated on you more than once. Do you really want this? They asked. And what could I say? Was my answer real? All these questions pressured me, and my own doubts grew even deeper. But even with all this, I could not deny that my soul felt something. My internal struggle was even more difficult. I couldn't forget his words when he asked for forgiveness. I couldn't forget the pain I felt when he left me without explanation. I fought with myself because my heart could not decide whether I was ready to give him another chance. On the one hand, my heart was closed to him, but on the other hand, a whole part of me longed for his return. I could feel his presence reawakening forgotten feelings in me. And it was all so confusing. Is it possible to forgive such a person? Is it possible to return to the past when you already have a new life path? What was worse, loneliness or returning to it? I looked at the old photos where he was back in my life again. It was a love that was so strong once, but was it still there? I could imagine what my life would look like if I let him be a part of me again. What would people say? How would it affect my reputation? All these questions added even more stress. I was not the same person I used to be. I had changed, becoming more independent, more stubborn. But could I have forgotten how we used to be together? Was I really ready to throw this emotional baggage in the trash and start over? I sat in my room, still not knowing what step to take. I couldn't find answers to all my questions. The pressure from others, my inner fears, all of this was mixing in my head, and I couldn't make a decision. No matter how hard I tried, I could not find a foothold. My heart wanted to restore this relationship, but my brain reminded me of how much it hurt when he left. I was trapped by my emotions and other people's expectations. Maybe, in fact, I'm just afraid of change. Because I've already realized that without change, I'm staying the same. And this choice, whatever it was, had to bring me some new step in my life. Should I return it or leave it? This question remained open, and I looked up and looked out the window again, seeing the night gradually falling on the city. And suddenly I realizing not everything in this world is decided now. Time will put everything in its place. I was sitting in the kitchen, looking at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. My heart seemed to have lost the ability to beat steadily. I was experiencing complex emotions, and every day was a challenge. It was as if I still couldn't come to a final decision. That moment when you feel that the whole world is waiting for your choice, and you can't understand what is right and what is wrong. I wasn't sure if I should go back to him anymore. How many times did I ask myself, what will happen if I give him a chance? I saw his face when he came to me to apologize, and every time it broke my heart. But I realized that I couldn't just forgive all those years of being deceived, of being alone. But now, when I was evaluating everything again, I realized that not only he had changed, I had also changed. I have it over the years. I have learned a lot, realized who I am and what I really want. I became independent, stubborn, and self-reliant. My life no longer depended on what was happening around me. I was no longer afraid of loneliness. In fact, it became my friend, my space for growth. So when I was ready to make a decision, something unexpected happened. I received a call. It was him. Dave, he asked if we could meet and talk. After an off course, I refused. After all, how could I give in to this illusion again? But then, a few days later, I received another message. And this time it was different. It was not just a hope for my return, but something I could not understand. He was revealing the truth that he had been hiding all these years. Something that shocked me. I didn't leave you because of you, he wrote. I left you because I was afraid, because I couldn't be the man you wanted me to be. I couldn't be your ideal, and it tore me apart. So I went to a young woman, to a new life. mothered to, but I was wrong. It was not real. You were my true love, and I realized it only now. When I read this message, my world just stopped. He realized that he was weak, that he was afraid to be honest and open. And now, 10 years later, he is finally able to tell the truth. Was it just an attempt to save face? Had he really changed? I couldn't answer this question right away. It was both painful and relieving at the same time. Was it enough to forgive him? After all, he had lost me, and I was not the same as I was 10 years ago. My views have changed. My life changed. I knew it was an important decision, and even after I got these confessions from him, I couldn't just go back. Everything was too complicated. What would I do with all the pain I had been through? And even if he really repented, would I be able to forget everything that happened? Would he be able to become a part of my life again, or would it just be a new beginning, but without him? In the end, I decided that now was not the time to make decisions together. I couldn't be with him just because he asked for forgiveness. I had to find answers in myself, not in him. I no longer wanted to depend on how he judged me. It was not the end, but the beginning of something new. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew that I would not deviate from my principles anymore. I had become strong enough in my life to go this way without him, and it was my choice, and I had the right to make it. So I closed my phone and went outside. The air was cold, but I felt more alive than ever. My soul was free, although heavy with all the emotions that were overwhelming it. And now I realized that a new path was already in front of me. I didn't find all the answers, but this moment was still important. Because sometimes we just have to accept that change is a part of life, and that not everything has to be perfect for us to move on. I took the first step, and with that step, everything became clearer. Then a few weeks passed since Dave came back in my life, and I still couldn't make a final decision. I went in circles trying to find some clarity, but there were no answers. What was I supposed to do? Go back to him? Forgive him for all those years of pain and betrayal? Or move on, leaving him behind as a part of my past? Life without him really became different. I found my freedom, learned to be happy on my own. I discovered new opportunities, new activities, new people. My heart was no longer in pain, and that was very important. I learned to be independent without expecting support from anyone. And although there were moments of loneliness, they no longer scared me. But sometimes there were moments when I remembered Dave. His smell, his laugh, his look that always amazed me, even when he was wrong. And he was back, and I couldn't escape this struggle between what was and what could have been. I tried to convince myself that it was only a temporary dip in emotions, that it was just a moment, and I would return to my new life again. But how can you forget someone who was once your support, your world? How can you forget the promises he made when we were together? How can you forget his eyes, full of no insincere sadness? It was a difficult question, and I could not find an answer. The burden of choice was on me. I realized that this choice would determine my future, my life. To return to him meant to open myself up to new pain, new disappointments. Rejecting him meant leaving behind what had once been everything to me and embarking on an unknown path. But was I ready for that? I was walking down the street, and all these thoughts were just covering me like a tsunami. I couldn't help myself. It was like a decision between two different worlds, and both of them seemed difficult to make. My friend Laura, with whom I often met for a cup of tea, tried to support me. She said that there is always a choice, but it is not always easy. Sometimes there is no right or wrong choice. Sometimes a choice is simply what we are willing to accept at the moment, even if it means living with unknown consequences. I thought about it, and it made sense. Maybe there was no right choice. I didn't have an answer, and that was scary. My intuition didn't show me a clear path. I wanted to change something, but I didn't know if it was a change for the better or for the worse. I couldn't understand what would happen if I gave him another chance. During the weeks when I refused to see him, I often thought back to what we had. Sometimes I thought that going back to those old times would be like drinking a rare wine that I had once tasted. But the more I thought, the more I realized that these memories no longer belonged to me. They were just part of my past. I couldn't leave my future in the hands of someone who had once betrayed me like that. It was like watching someone you used to care about, and now you see them trying to come back. But you don't know if you want him to come back. Is it worth giving him a chance after everything that has happened? Or will it just ruin what I'm building for the future? I started to feel like I didn't know what I wanted more, for him to stay or for him to leave forever. But with every day that passed, I felt more and more that this choice was getting harder. My life was becoming empty again. I wanted peace, and this peace depended only on me. But the more I tried to get away from him, the more his shadow followed me. I went to the park. I sat on a bench and looked at the water. The water was calm, but I saw something unpredictable in its depths. My soul was like this water, but I could not understand what I wanted, and when I came to the answer, it would be too late. It was a struggle that I could not win. The choice seemed impossible, because every choice brought its own pain and difficulties. And what was worse, I didn't know if any of them would be right. From the moment I realized that I would not be able to give a final answer, I began to accept this as part of my life. There may not be one right decision. Sometimes the choice is not what we make, but how we deal with the consequences of that choice. The unanswered choice left an emptiness, but I decided to live with that emptiness, trying to fill it with new opportunities and new perspectives. And although I did not know what would happen next, I have already realized that sometimes the path without clear answers becomes the path to our true freedom. Waking up early in the morning, I sat in the kitchen, looking out the window. Behind the glass, it was an ordinary dawn. The light was pink on the horizon. The birds were singing, and everything around me seemed so familiar and so far away at the same time. I realized one thing long ago: life has no clear answer. And at that moment, I felt that maybe this was not the end. It wasn't a moment of parting, it was a moment of choice, what to do next. My thoughts continued to fluctuate, giving me no peace. Dave and I had a clear past, but not so clear a future. My soul was still confused, and I began to ask myself again, am I really ready to let him back? Can I forgive everything that happened and just start from scratch? During all these years, I lived with the feeling that I had lost a part of myself. But no matter how hard I tried to fill that space, I couldn't escape the fact that there was still an emptiness in my heart. With all the changes, new opportunities, people I met, all the events that took place in my life, for some reason I couldn't completely get rid of that heavy shadow that hung over my past. And that shadow was him, Dave. I still couldn't forget the day he left. Those long years of feeling abandoned left deep scars. It seemed impossible to forgive. And, although I tried again and again to explain to myself that people change, that everyone has the right to a second chance, something kept me from letting go of these emotions. My everyday was now a struggle between two worlds: the world in which I could return to him, and the world in which I was already a different person. I felt like a new person. I had changed over the years, and I found so much strength in myself that I didn't think I could have. I became stronger, more independent, more confident. And I no longer wanted to be someone who waited for someone. I was no longer ready to be someone who was just waiting for the past to come back, for Dave to come back. But at the same time, I realized that this feeling was not just about pushing him away. It was deeper than that. I was afraid that if I didn't forgive him, I would leave a part of anger in my heart that would prevent me from developing further. This became my internal conflict. Am I ready to forgive him for everything in order to move on, or will I hold this resentment forever? A few days passed, and I decided to meet with him. I didn't know what would happen next. Would this be the last time we would meet? Would I find the strength to forgive him? Or would I leave him behind completely, with all his mistakes and betrayals? He was waiting for me in the park, in the very place where we used to meet, where our story began. I looked at him and immediately felt my heart beat faster again. It was impossible and yet so realistic. High eyes were looking at me with such sadness and such questions, just as they had when we were together. And in his eyes I saw something new. He was different. Was he really changed? Or was he just trying to change his role in my life? I sat down next to him, and the silence between us began to fill the space. Dave didn't speak right away. He was probably also trying to find words that could explain what couldn't be explained. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said quietly, desperately. "But I want you to know that I was a fool. I realize that only now, when everything is lost." I listened, and despite all the pain that still lived inside me, I knew one thing: I didn't want to live with that pain anymore. My answer was short and clear. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I won't hold this pain on you anymore. I'm moving on for myself, and I think this is the only right decision." I didn't know if that was the final answer, but at that moment I felt that although my past with him would remain in my heart, I was ready to move forward. We left in silence, each with our own thoughts. I didn't know if that was the right answer, but I realized that I had done everything I could to free myself from that pain. Now I could take control of my future again. And, although it was not the final end, I felt that I had found peace in my heart. I knew I was ready to move on with my life, despite all my doubts and uncertainties. But it may have been the end of a certain part of my life, but it was also the beginning of something new. And although this path was still not easy, I was ready to walk it.